Recently, we lost to the NCERT Razia Sultan, Jehan, Tipu Sultan. We lost all these figures.
In fact, I think for 8th class female students would be a very inspiring thing to read about. So it's a fantastic, bit of history that must be told to the student. But somehow they've completely removed this 4 years. It really speaks volumes that the NCERT has chosen to remove two very fascinating rulers who had so much of power, who wielded so much of power in a massively male-dominated world.
But in the third tenure of the BJP government, allegations of saffronization of history have been found. And what do you think this is different from the kind of reframing of history we've seen in the past?
So I think it's very clear, and the NCERT is not even pretending anymore that they have their biases set. And they are going to use NCERT textbooks as some sort of a weapon. The child is learning something which is just not there, something which is just dishonest, right? So what are you actually teaching the kid? There's a Bertrand Russell quote that says that if you lie to the kids, you're actually bringing up a generation of liars.
Hello, I'm Tarushi Aswani, and today at The Wire, we're here to discuss a crucial decision that can adversely modify the way Indians, especially generations to come, may look at our history, heritage, and the truth of our political past. With Dr. Ruchika Sharma, a historian, we're looking at the recent reframing in NCERT's history textbooks and what they may mean for the future. Hi Ruchika, welcome to The Wire. So there are certain questions I have for you, and these questions concern the current reframing that the NCERT has done with history textbooks, with school textbooks. So recently the changes we saw were heavily based on the way Central Asian invaders are spoken about in our history textbooks. So for example, I'll give you a statement which is a change in the textbooks. It goes like, by force or violence if necessary, their own versions of their religion. Another change being the way Jizya has been explained. The book now reads, it is a tax paid by non-Muslims towards protection and exemption from military service, incentivized conversion to Islam. Do you sense historicity in these changes or an attempt to conjure hate against Central Asians, their religion, their culture, etc.?
Okay, so a couple of things. Firstly, this idea that the NCERT is putting in that there is somehow in these Central Asian quote-unquote invaders, and we'll come to the invader bit a little later. But this idea that somehow they are trying to force their religion onto the non-Muslim population of the subcontinent is absolutely ahistorical. Because if you look at it, even when the Jizya is first instituted and is put into practice by Caliph Omar, this is in 634 AD. This happens when he takes the forces of Islam to Iran, Iraq and the Levant, and there is a massive amount of non-Muslim population over there. The only reason why they pay Jizya is so that they can become zimmis of the state. The word comes from zimma, which means zimmedari, which means responsibility. So the state is responsible for the non-Muslim population and their protection. And they're exempt from military service. There is no idea over there that if you don't want to pay, you can convert, right? Or that we want you to convert, therefore we are forcing this additional tax on you, right? There are a series of other, additional taxes that the Muslims had to pay. But, we don't want to really go into it right now. Because the point over here is that there is nowhere ever, even when in the 9th, 10th century, the Islamic jurists put together the fiqh, the different schools of law. So there is Hanifi, Hanbali, Shafi, Maliki. None of these ever talk about the jizya is going to encourage people to convert. In fact, in Omar's time, conversion to Islam is made as a very difficult process. If you are an Arab, a Muslim Arab, and you want somebody to convert, you will have to take them on as a mawali, which means a client, and then you'll have to indoctrinate Islam. So it's a very long and lengthy process. It's not as easy as just saying the kalma and now you're a Muslim, right? So I think this idea is completely ahistorical. Another very important bit of fact that I think the NCERT is either missing out or deliberately leaving is the fact that the Brahmins were always exempt from paying jizya. these were people who were never asked to pay jizya. There was this general, and I think this has always been there, even before the Mughals or the Sultans came in. There has always been this very happy friendship between the people who are at the top of the social order, which is the Brahmins, and the people who are at the top of the political order, which is the kings. And as long as both of these are happy and both of these are in coherence with each other, together with each other, it's all good for the state as well as for the religion, right? So the Brahmins were mostly exempted. The Brahmins, in fact, played a huge role in Akbar's Maktab Khana, his translation house, etc. So this idea that somehow the jizya is coming in to convert is absolutely ahistorical. There has never, in fact, been this idea that we are going to kill somebody if they don't convert to Islam. People tend to think that, Aurangzeb instituted this. Aurangzeb only instituted this as a way of requiring pardon. So if you've committed treason against the state, you can acquire pardon by converting to Islam. But somehow it has gotten translated into, if you don't accept Islam, we're going to kill you, which is not the case. The case is, if you don't want pardon, then you are going to go through with the punishment, which is often execution, right? And also this fact that somehow it comes across that the NCERT wants only Mughals and the Sultans to be looked at as violent rulers, which is completely hilarious, because which ruler in Indian history or any history has not done violence? Violence was the mainstay of all monarchies. And in fact, there are instances of worse violence, right? So there is a grant called the Kuram Pallav grant, wherein there is a fight happening between the Pallavas and the Cholas. And what happens as a result is that the Pallava ruler, when he loses, he gets, Vijaya tattooed on his back. And this is at a time when tattoos were really not, in vogue the way it is today, where you're inked, right? So that would mean that he was actually burnt with these letters to remind him of the fact that he has been conquered, right? So this is the level of violence we're talking about. There is so much of violence against women all the time, whether it's Mughals, whether it's Sultans, whether it's the Cholas. One of the first things that they'll acquire is women of the royal household. So we have grants upon grants of the Cholas which say that one of the things that they would do whenever they would acquire a particular kingdom, say for example when they acquired the kingdom of the Chalukyas, what they did was they cut the nose of the commander of the of the daughter of the commander of the Chalukyas, a woman called Nagalai. Right? And she was considered to be, in the inscription, she is described as somebody who's as beautiful as the peacock. And this is because they wanted to disgrace her. And, by disgracing her, therefore disgrace the community that she belongs to, the Chalukya family that she belongs to, etc. And she's a person who's not a part of the war at all. This is completely, she's a civilian population. And the rest of the women are looted and they're kidnapped. Similarly, when the Chola ruler goes to Pandya territory in Ceylon, the ruler Veera Salamagan, his mother gets her nose cut by the Chola ruler. His daughter is kidnapped, his sister is kidnapped. This is all civilian population. But somehow for the NCERT, Akbar is brutal because he ordered the killing of civilians during the siege of Chittor, but not the Chola. So there is a sense of double standard. There is a sense that the NCERT is trying too hard to tell the kids that, only the Mughals and the Sultans were violent. Only they wanted to, use their force of religion. In fact, if you look at it, in the 19th century, the total population of the Muslims was around 16%, right? This we know because there was a French traveler, Monsieur Hébert, who writes in his book, Travels of Monsieur Hébert, I think it's called, and he says that the population is 16% of the Muslims, right? And then when you look at the British census, which happens in the 20th century, it increases to 25%. So actually the massive jump happens during the English time. And there are a host of other reasons for it. There is medical facilities have improved, there's bigger life expectancy, so on and so forth, childbirth has improved, this, that, and the other. So there are many reasons for why there is, in general, a population boom anyway post-industrial revolution, but also for the Muslims. But this does not occur during the time of the Mughals. Mm-hmm. In fact, even Eaton, etc. have said that the places where the Mughal control was the least, which is Kerala and West Bengal, right? There you have actually the maximum number of Muslim population. So if the Mughals really were converting people using their sword, then these areas would not have a lot of Muslim population, right? Areas such as, for example, MP, etc., which are still massively Hindu, right? MP, Rajasthan, these were actually the crux of the Mughal Empire. So they would have been massively Muslim if they ever wanted to convert using violence.
Okay, so next, jumping on to several important historical Mughal figures who do not find mention in our textbooks anymore. So recently, we lost to the NCERT Razia Sultan, Nur Jehan, Tipu Sultan. We lost all these figures, and I think 2 years ago we also lost the mention of Lodis, Mamluks, Tughlaqs, all these surnames which have a lot of history to do with our city and our country and its past as a whole have lost mention. So what do you think about that? What can be the factor that NCERT thought that we need to get rid of them?
Yeah, I think that in itself is a huge deal. Getting rid of Razia and getting rid of Nurjan, because both of them were rulers in their own right. Razia especially because she comes at a very interesting juncture, starting from 1236, when her father is dead, and she is actively being threatened by a group of these very powerful Turkish nobles called the Bandagan, who want to move away from, who were instituted ironically by Iltutmish, but they want to move away from Iltutmish's family, right? So they are actually, killing, they kill Razia's half-brother, they threaten to kill his very young half-brother as well, right? And they want to institute Ruknuddin Firoz, another one of Razia's half-brother, onto the throne, right? And Ruknuddin Firoz's mother is also actively part of this. So she has this court intrigue, and all throughout she tries to manage this court intrigue and come out on the top and become the ruler. And then in that 4 years, she does so much. She repels a Mongol invasion diplomatically. She shuns the Parda. She has coins minted in her own name. Before, in the first year of her rule, first one and a half year of her rule, she's ruling behind a screen, because there is this idea that her face should not be shown. She's a woman. But then she removes the screen. She wears the clothes of the Sultan. A lot of papers have been written on cross-dressing, because she is now dressing in the male attire, because usually the sultans are considered to be male, so the attire therefore is suited to a male body. But she dons that, and she rides the horse, and there are people upon people who look at her. And later on, in around 14th 15th century, she's shamed for all of these actions. But when she's actually the ruler, and the people who are contemporary to her, for example, Minhaj Siraj Jizjani, who's written this fantastic book called the Tabaqat-e-Nasiri, which is a chronicle of the Delhi Sultan. He says that to him, she is Sultan Razia Lashkar Kash, which means somebody who takes her army in the war, right? Who leads her army into the war. So there is a lot of, this in fact, I think for 8th class female students would be a very inspiring thing to read about. How this woman is actually, and she's constantly being challenged by these Turkish Bandagan, and how she manages to politically keep them at bay, but eventually falls prey to that and dies in battle, right? So it's a fantastic, bit of history that must be told to the student, but somehow they've completely removed this 4 years. It really speaks volumes that the NCERT has chosen to remove two very fascinating rulers who had so much of power, who wielded so much of power in a massively male-dominated world, right? So I think that sends all the wrong signals. Similarly with Nur Jahan, so she wasn't really a ruler in her own right like Razia was. She was a proper sultan. She is the wife of the emperor, the Badshah, Jahangir. But even she gets to rule all by herself for 4 years when Jahangir is very ill. Right? There is a lot of history of her court intrigues. She is in fact considered to be somebody who is sartorially very forward-looking. So she designed, different versions of the churidar. She designed different versions of the odhni, so on and so forth. There are so many things that are attributed to her. She was an amazing poetess, for example. She was an amazing hunter. Jahangir talks about how she managed to kill 4 tigers with just 6 shots, right? Sitting on an elephant, which, is not very difficult because the elephant's shaky. So your, aim is not always correct. But she managed to, do such an amazing feat. So I think removing Noor Jahan, again a very powerful woman, she wielded the Muhuruzuk, which is the royal stamp of the Mughals during her time. She minted coins in her own name, right? So these are all fantastic things, and I think for the female students who are reading this, they will now be reading, rulers upon rulers who are just male. It is a nice refresher to think that, these have been these two women in medieval India who've also been very powerful and who've wielded a lot of power. It is in any way a very inspiring thought and a very refreshing perspective to see how a woman was doing things, right? But they've, I think, decided to remove this because in their head they want to give this idea. Again, coming back to the point that Mughals were somebody and Sultans were somebody who were misogynists and, they looted women. And of course, there is no doubt that every ruler on the battlefield looted women. There is no doubt about this. But somehow they want only the Mughals to be recognized by this action. And therefore, if you show, Razia in the positive light that she deserves to be in, Noor Jahan in the positive light that she deserves to be in, this will somehow harm their narrative that the Mughals and the Sultans were bad and therefore they didn't want women to, take the throne, so on and so forth.
Okay, so the argument exists that in every country, whichever government is in power, they try to frame history in their own way, right? It's not just that this sitting government is trying to reframe or rhetoricize history in a way. But in the third tenure of the BJP government, allegations of saffronization of history have been found. And what do you think this is different from the kind of reframing of history we've seen in the past?
Yeah, I think you've made a very good point. I think every time there is a change of the government, the history textbooks undergo a change, and this has always happened. But what was happening previously before 2014 was basically that there was a narrative tilt. So either the narrative would be slightly pro-Congress, which would show Congress in a very nice light, or it will be slightly pro-BJP, which will show BJP in a nice light. What is happening now is basically two things. Firstly, there is gross criminalization of the syllabus, wherein they are making assertions which are absolutely absurd. For example, like I said, only Mughals were violent, only they were, looting women, only they are brutal, only they are killing civilians. So these are absolutely ahistorical claims. They have no basis. Coupled with that, they are introducing alt facts, which has never happened in the NCERT before. This NCERT, for all its horribleness, was always sticking to the facts, right? So at least that was something that we were assured of, but now we're no longer assured of that. So for example, I think in the class 11th or 12th textbook of history, they say that Aryan migration is just a theory, which is incorrect, by the way. It's a completely established fact now by these two studies in Cell and Science in 2019. But NCERT says it's just a theory. There is another theory, a rival theory, which says that the Aryans were from here, they were born here, and then they went outside. Which study are they referring to? They don't tell us this. So somehow NCERT no longer feels the need to tell people, to tell students, to tell the parents of these students who are reading these textbooks, where is this source, that they are referring to, that they are writing from, and they're making such massive claims. So where is this theory proven? Is there linguistic evidence for this? No. Is there archaeological evidence for this? No. Is there genetic evidence for this? Absolutely not. In fact, genetic evidence points exactly to the opposite. So this is my problem with NCERT now. What it is doing is alt facts, like the Jizya thing as well. This completely new idea that somehow it was an incentive to convert. Nobody has ever read this. No historian would ever claim that, Jizya was an incentive to convert. So where are they getting this source from? And also these, double standards, which seem very deliberate. That, fine, we for example, another example is, they have completely removed and they, there was a report in the HT where they questioned the social science curricula head, Michael Danino, who's responsible for a lot of these changes in the books. They questioned that, you have removed the Maratha atrocities against the Bengalis from 1741 to 1751. And those are atrocities, by the way, that are still remembered by a lot of the Marathis in this very interesting poem called Chhele Ghumalo something something, Borgialo Deshe, Bulbulite Dhan Khaiche, Khajna Debo Kishi, or something like that, which basically means that the Borgis have come to our lands, and how are we going to be able to pay such a massive tax that they're levying on us? And it goes on to detail their brutality. So they're still remembered, and Borgi basically in Bengali would refer to an invader, but it comes from the fact that these were people who would practice guerrilla warfare, Bargirgiri. So that's how they got the term Borgi. So they have completely removed this bit from the class 8 textbook, the Maratha atrocities on the Bengalis. And when Michael Denino was asked this, he said he doesn't want to overburden the kids. Well, so I think NCERT is deliberately making a choice that overburdening over here would mean giving away the atrocities of the non-Muslim rulers. But overburdening does not mean giving away the atrocities of, say, for example, even Akbar. So I think Akbar was the only ruler left which everybody in the popular sphere regarded as somebody who was, cosmopolitan or whatever. But I think they have gone all guns blazing against him and have called his rule as a blend of brutality and tolerance. And they've picked for brutality just one instance in his 45 years of rule. So it goes on to show that somehow 10 years of brutality against civilians in Bengal by the Marathas is not cruel for the NCERT and is a burden to the students. But this person's 45 years of rule, one particular incident, is something that the students must absolutely importantly know about. Otherwise, oh my God, they're somehow going to miss out on something massive, learning in history. So I think it's very clear, and the NCERT is not even pretending anymore that they have their biases set, and they are going to use NCERT textbooks as some sort of a weapon to, not just push narratives, but to push facts which no longer exist. Facts which are mere, they're not even facts, these are mere beliefs. This is something that you would 10 years ago or maybe, 7 years ago find on WhatsApp forwards. Now they've made it to a book. And I think that is my biggest concern.
Okay, so as we now established that the NCERT is doing a cherry picking when it comes to facts and what is factually right? So in this dichotomy of statements where we are seeing certain sourceless statements making it to our children's textbooks and factual statements flying away, what do you think this does to us as people who should know history of a particular place? Additively, how do we see this sort of a characterization of historical rulers? History, I believe, is meant to be objective, right? We are supposed to know history in total objectivity and not subjectivity. But now that we are seeing that there is certain sort of a subjectivity coming on to the way Mughal characters are portrayed in textbooks and the way sort of Hindu rulers are portrayed in textbooks, what does that do to a child who's in school?
Yeah, I think this is very concerning, because what is actually happening right now is using terms like brutal and cruel without actually defining what those terms mean, what your criteria is for brutal, and why, for example, like I said, the Chola ruler is not brutal, is a very dangerous thing to serve to kids. Because the kid goes home thinking, for example, this is the only textbook that talks about temple destruction, which is again very ahistorical, because temple destruction has been a fact of Indian history ever since temples have been, ever since stupas have been made, even before the temples, right? So there has been massive destruction by, say, the Hunna ruler Mihirakula of so many Buddhist shrines. There is, Kalhan's Rashtarangini talks about several rulers. There's Shankar Varman, who looted 64 temples. There is King Harsha of Kashmir, who destroyed every temple in Kashmir save 2 temples. He even went ahead to soil the images, the idols of the gods. So this is something that is just not found, in the class 6 or class 7 textbooks. Somehow, what the NCERT wants kids to know, is that only they were practicing temple destruction, not anyone else. The Buddhist sites were not destroyed by temple builders. They were. You have Pushyamitra Shunga, you have Mihrakula, you have Shemagupta of Kashmir who just burnt down an entire monastery, right? There was an entire movement of the Veershaivites from the 12th, 13th century where in Karnataka, where they are capturing live, which means they're still in action. These are not old sites. They're still being worshipped by the Jains. These are Jain sites. They're capturing these Jain basalis and, breaking parts of it and converting into Shaiva shrines. There is the Megudi temple in Hallur where you have the still intact image of the Jinnah uprooted from the Garbhagriha, the Sanctum Sanctorum, smeared with the Veershaiva ash and kept right in the central aisle so that everybody can see that, this particular temple has been conquered. There is no mention of something like this. So I think what the NCERT is doing is they have it in their head that, these are rulers who are brutal. And that is what we're going to tell kids. They're very clear about this. And the kid is also going to learn. Mughals were brutal. Sultans were brutal. Cholas were good, right? Because the word brutal is not associated with them. So I think this is extremely, extremely harmful because this is, even though, there is one line of the NCERT saying nobody today is responsible for this. But well, look around you. There is so much of communalization anyway in the society, which of course, has been deliberately constructed by the powers that be. But the kids are going to go home thinking only Muslim rulers were bad. And I think that is furthering communalization. That is not just communalization, but also ahistorical, because neither of these things is true, right? Not only are they practicing temple destruction, almost every ruler has done some amount of temple destruction in his time. So I think this is my worry, that it is, and these are very, very young kids, these are 13, 14-year-old teens, and they're learning this lesson in communalism far too early, and this shouldn't be happening.
So you said something very interesting, that we already live in a very communal atmosphere, and these books sort of further it and mainstream the kind of communalism that exists. So we've had certain historic films that exist in the market, be it films like Chhawa, which was recently, it saw something happening because of the film. After the film hit the theaters, we saw things happening in the communal light. We've also seen films like Tanhaji, which show Mughal rulers in a very barbaric, violent and, just sadistic vibe. And we also have films like Kashmir Files, Kerala Stories, which again fan a sort of particular sentiment. So what do you think tinkering with history does? Textbooks or history in its actuality, what does it do when we opinionate history or when we use history to further a narrative that is comfortable for us?
Yeah, I think both of these mediums are very interesting. Firstly, textbooks to very young students, and cinema, because both of these have a huge amount of impact. I'll come to the cinema bit first. Cinema has a massive impact because it's visual. So saying that so many people were killed in a textbook will have certain effect, but showing those people actually being killed on screen is going to have a massive effect on the person who's watching it. There's going to be a background music which amplifies that emotion. There is going to be, you'll actually see blood, etc. So you'll hear people scream, etc. So it creates this atmosphere which the brutality really comes to life. And I think cinema therefore does more damage to everybody who's watching it, kids as well as adults. And therefore, filmmakers need to be very responsible. So, for example, Tanhaji. Now, you show Tanhaji, the Mughals are in the bad light, but who is the person who actually fought against Tanhaji and got him finally? Udayban Rathore, a Rajput ruler. This is a massive fact that the NCERT as well as, a lot of these movies are trying hook, line and sinker to hide the fact that, it was just the Mughal Empire, it was a Mughal Rajput Empire. Rajput was the mainstay of the Mughal Empire. Most of the Mansab, even during Aurangzeb's reign, so it starts from I think 16 to 20% under Akbar, where the Mansabdari, around 16 to 20% of it is Rajput, goes on to 33% under Aurangzeb, which is the highest under any Mughal ruler. And these are people who gain immensely from it. They benefit immensely from it. But when you come to movies like Tanhaji, they would just not show it, or they would show the Rajput ruler as the odd one out, which is again incorrect. this is not the exception. At that point of time, getting a mansabdari for a Rajput ruler, high-ranking mansabdari, especially, for example, somebody like Raja Bharmal Kachwaha, who had his daughter married to Akbar, who eventually gave birth to Salim, who became Jahangir. His profits really skyrocketed. He became the Panjhazari Mansabdar, which is 5,000 rank. His nephew Mansingh was finally elevated to 5,000 rank Mansabdar. He's the person, Mansingh is the person who fights against the Maharana Pratap in Haldigati. He's the person who, creates such an amazing war strategy. Abul Fazl talks about it, that, the Maharana had no other choice but to eventually, leave the battlefield. Then, Jai Singh is the person who concludes the treaty of Purandar with Shivaji. So, this idea that somehow the Mughals were the people who were going ahead with the brutality is absolutely ahistorical, but the movies only want to talk about this. They don't want to show that, at the end of the day, it was a very curious case of the Rajputs favoring the Mughals because the Mughal favor really benefited them, right? Also, I think another thing is that movies of lately have a very interesting way of depicting Muslim rulers, which I think also goes into really shaping the psyche of how the average person sees a Muslim ruler. One is, of course, they are all, with these massive beards. But if you look at, for example, the portraits of, say, Jahangir and Akbar and Shah Jahan, Shah Jahan maybe not to that, but certainly Jahangir and Akbar, they are all clean shaven, right? One thing that really stands out is all of them will probably have a handlebar, which I think for a very long time has been the Indic idol of male beauty or ideal male beauty is sporting a handlebar. Right? But somehow these people will have these massive beards. They'll have coal in their eyes. Again, none of these paintings depict any of these rulers with coal in their eyes. And also, this hyper masculine idea. I think this is a very fascinating idea, and I remember speaking to somebody about a news report as well. I think I'm not forgetting the name of the newspaper who did this, but it's a very fascinating thing because associated with all of this is also an idea of manosphere. And how, somehow war and violence makes the Muslim rulers slightly more masculine. So they're always shown very ripped, etc. Well, Akbar had a paunch, and he was very glad portraying that in the painting because that time it depicted status, right? Jahangir had a paunch. All of these rulers would have a paunch. Jahangir was such a drunkard, so he would have certainly had a paunch. This idea that you are depicting Muslim rulers according to your wish of how a quote-unquote monster should look like is very fascinating. They'll always have this grimace on their face as if they're always up to some evil, cunning plan. When most of the times Akbar is probably thinking what's going to be, for dinner today or something like that. In his real life, this is a person in the movie who's always hatching some cunning plan, right? It's very fascinating how they depict the Muslim ruler in itself as well. It also, by the way, comes from Amar Chitrakatha. I'm going to just take a minute. So if you look at Amar Chitrakatha and how they depict, say, Alauddin Khalji, and then if you look at Ranveer Singh in Padmavat, they're exactly the same. They're also wearing the same hat. They also have the same grimace. I'm very sure Alauddin Khalji, Ranveer Singh as Alauddin Khalji would have been asked to look at Amar Chitrakatha because there is such a fascinating, similarity. If you could probably, I don't know, show it on the screen right now, it'll be very clear. So I think it's fascinating how there is a Muslim ruler ideal which is developed for the movies. For example, Alauddin Khilji is eating raw meat in Padmavat. He's such a rich ruler. Why would he ever eat raw meat in his life? There is no reason for it. He'd probably have the best cooked meat out there, the best mutton cooked for him or something like that. Right? So it's absolutely ridiculous. And also then, therefore, the textbooks, right? A lot of this, fascinatingly, first comes in the cinema, creates this Muslim idol, the Muslim ruler's idol, and then finds itself with words such as brutal, cruel in the textbook, right? To the child who's watched Chhawa and who is now reading the textbook, it is a double affirmation that the Muslim rulers were cruel and brutal. He can now picture the Muslim evil in his head. And that is going to lead him to become a very, very communal person who's going to further the propaganda of communalism, which benefits a lot of the political parties.
Okay, so now that we've understood that there's a nexus within the kind of atmosphere, communal atmosphere we live in, and then the kind of misinformation and propaganda that is fanned through certain films. And now with the NCERT dropping and picking history to its convenience, what do you think we are losing in this whole exercise? So, what is the value of the historic knowledge that we are losing, and what will this weaken in the future in our education of history?
Firstly, it weakens history because what NCERT is telling us is massively ahistorical, right? Cherry picking facts, only showing it, say for example, temple destruction, etc., only showing it in relation to the Mughal rulers, deliberately creating this ideal of a brutal Muslim ruler. We are losing history in the process because none of this is history, none of this is historical. So first loss is the loss of history itself. The other loss is the loss of integrity, because I think there is a certain amount of trust that every parent has when they are sending their kids to the school, that he's actually going to learn something, quote unquote, unbiased. He's going to learn something which is an honest depiction of, say, history or political science or any other subject, right? But if he is going to school and he has textbooks which are governed by, people who are at least 24 members, by the way, of the NCERT have a direct affiliation to the RSS. There was a 2022 Quint report that claimed that. So if he is going to learn, books like these, there is no integrity in those books. There is absolutely no honesty and no integrity. The child is learning something which is just not there, something which is just dishonest, right? So what are you actually teaching the kid? There's a Bertrand Russell quote that says that if you lie to the kids, you're actually bringing up a generation of liars. And that's what I think we are bringing up. And of course, thirdly, the most dangerous aspect of this is it creates a communal bias in the heads of very young, very impressionable kids who are going to grow up with this fact that Muslim rulers were bad, they were cruel, they were evil. And even though NCERT says nobody today is responsible for it, the current atmosphere is going to convince them, because there's so much on the internet now. It's going to convince them that Muslims in effect are bad. And this is spreading communalism.
So you made this very interesting point about RSS affiliated members being a part of a band that makes our books. Yeah. The books you and I have grown up reading, the books that had objectivity. So RSS's long-standing mission has been a campaign against the revision of textbooks which we have grown up reading, which did not have an iota of subjectivity when it came to sharing historical facts as they stood in historical books. So do you think RSS is successful now that we have such books, and what do you fear for textbooks in the future?
Is RSS successful? Well, as of now, it seems like it, because I think they've actually managed to capture a lot of the educational institutions. So it's not just, of course, the NCERT. If you look at even the kind of faculty that is coming in the Delhi University right now, in Jamia, etc., a lot of them have affiliations with the RSS. There's no doubt about this. In fact, more than that, educational qualification in itself means nothing. So there are recruitments that have happened of teachers who don't even meet the basic criteria, which is the NET test, right? So I think that in itself is a massive erasure, the erasure of the education system as we knew it, which had certain modicum of integrity that, okay, these are the rules and you're going to play by the rules, right? Those rules are no longer applicable. Educational qualifications no longer matter. Expertise no longer matters, right? So I think this is something that the RSS has been quite successful in putting forward its ideology. What I am not sure, and I guess maybe because I'm a bit of an optimist, what I'm not sure is how much of it actually translates into their vote bank, and realizing, that, okay, people are going to actually believe in this information that we are serving and act on it. I am not sure how much of that is getting translated into action. Of course, a lot of it is. So, for example, we saw, the riots in Nagpur, etc., Chhawa related, right? But how far will this go? Because at the end of the day, I think when a certain person goes on to vote, they are not just voting because, oh, well, they hate Muslims. They're also voting, but what do I get from it, right? So I think that aspect is something that I think the current dispensation is completely failed at. Given the massive unemployment, etc. So I am hoping that the people at the end of the day are going to save the day, even if the institutions themselves have fallen, right? Especially the education institutions.
So now that we're at the juncture where we realize that the NCERT is actively cherry picking, we can also find a similarity in the way the government of the day has been cherry picking in terms of the kind of historical events it wants to highlight and the events it wants to forget. So the emergency has been a BJP favorite, as we know, in the last 11 years. It has been highlighted, it has been shared about, it has been remembered, it has been termed as a dark period in the history of India. While it is important to learn about the emergency as well, why do you think the BJP is pushing for the convenient elimination of the Gujarat riots from history textbooks? And what does that do to our understanding of history?
I think there was a very interesting interview with Dinesh Saklani, who was I think, director of the NCERT or something, when he was asked that why have you removed, these riots. So Babri riots, the riots related to the Babri demolition, Godhra riots, as well as partition riots, they've removed all of these. So they asked, why have you done this? So they said, that's because we want to actually inculcate positivity in students. We want positive citizens and not negative citizens. Now, I have no idea what that means, because it's not like kids in this day and age of internet are not going to learn that these riots happened, that Babri riots happened, that Godhra riots happened, that partition riots happened. I learned so much about partition riots from my own grandparents because they suffered, these riots. But the version that I learned from them is not really the popular version, where there is always this very, clear-cut silos of Hindus versus Muslims. It's a very different version that I heard from my grandparents. So, of course, this generation is going to know about this. The problem, therefore, is what they are not going to learn in the class, they're going to learn outside on the internet and make their own conclusions about this. Now, riots in itself are a very sensitive issue, and they require a degree of sensitivity that needs to be taught, right? So that teaching can only happen inside a classroom, where there is a teacher to control which has a level of expertise and a modicum of understanding that, okay, this is how I'm going to teach this particular bit. On the internet, whatever they read, whatever they hear about it, they are going to just absorb this, right? So at least in the class, there'll be some amount of critical thinking that will develop. And I think that is what Mr. Saklani meant when he said that we don't want negative citizens. Because negative citizens, I think, in his mind, are citizens that question. In his mind are citizens that can critically analyze, that are forced to think within the environs of the classroom. That, okay, if these riots happen, why did they happen? And how can we make sure that they don't happen again, right? So I think it's very important to understand that what the NCERT is trying to do is basically create this idea that, okay, this is what is history. Please learn this, write it in an exam, and that's it, right? There is no critical analysis whatsoever. It's not like NCERT was at one point of time known for its critical analysis developing skills. I'm not saying that. But I think it's gone from bad to worse now, right? Because that modicum of critical analysis that the teacher could develop, that has been completely, I think, removed. And I think that is very unfortunate.
You talked about this fact that there is no room for critical analysis, and we do not have the idea of conclusions to certain events once they're, of course, removed from our textbooks. So, in the last 11 years, what do you think are the 5 ways in which the education of history or history telling has changed in India?
I think first of all, the idea of education in itself has changed. Because at one point of time, the idea of education that I remembered was basically that you study and you study from as many books as possible, that studying somehow is a good thing. But now what has happened is there is this idea that studying is not a very good thing, because there is somehow this idea that if I'm going to study and I'm going to, gain XYZ degree, I'm going to get a nice job, I'm going to be able to realize my fullest potential. That has been moved out of the window, because this overtaking of the educational institution is instituted that it does not matter what qualification you have, as long as you're affiliated to a certain political party you're in. So education in itself means nothing. It doesn't matter whether you have the required education qualifications, you do it on the job, you take it 10 years later, but as long as you're serving the party, as long as you're serving the agenda of a particular political party or political parties, you are in that particular institution, right? So I think that the meaning of education in itself has changed, right? It no longer means something that you gain to better yourself, that you gain to understand the world, that you gain to also acquire a job, which I think is a fair way to look at education as well. All of these have changed, right? You now just have education and you're going to pass it and you're going to score marks, right? That was a lot of it was there then as well, but now I think all of it is just this, right? And also the fact that I think the another thing that we've lost is the loss of integrity and honesty when it comes to education, right? Because there is no integrity and honesty in the institutions that govern education, right? If you are going to use textbooks, for such young kids as a kind of weapon, as a kind of political weapon to gain votes and to create a generation of students who are drunk on communalism, then there is no integrity and honesty left in the education system at all. Another way I think in which education has changed for very recently is also I think the way we sort of depict it, in the sense that, for example, and I'm going to come back to the movie points. There was once when you had Mughal-e-Azam, etc., right, wherein fine, there was this idea that, completely ahistorical idea, by the way, that Jahangir revolted for love or whatever. That's not there. It's a completely fictional thing. But everything else was true to the point. For example, Prithviraj Kapoor playing Akbar. That is how Akbar would have actually probably looked like in his life. They've kept it, they've actually used education, they've used books to create movies, right? Which is not what you find today. They are no longer using books. What they are using is a primer of communalism, which has been taught to them, which they know will create a lot of this jingoism, etc. And that is what is coming across in the movie. So there is now no education, which is also depicted on the screen. At one point of time, you would have like Bharat Ek Khoj and Discovery of India, which are also educational programs. That in itself has died. So there is no idea of an educational program, right? Another way I think in which education has completely been radicalized, revolutionized, changed is the fact that where are we taking our education from? Like a lot of the people today, for example, when it comes to history, think going to a chat GPT is much better than me picking up a book, right? Asking Grok to fact check a historian, right? Telling a historian, you don't know history, watch Chava, right? So there is this general idea of, I don't need books to gain education. I can just gain education by chat GPTing it. It's going to read books for me. It's going to give me the summary, right? And anyway, this is an information overload age. I can get something from the internet anyway, right? And sound very erudite or whatever and have a nice dinner party conversation about it. So education in itself, therefore, has become, in my opinion, redundant. You don't need it to actually develop your brain. You can ask a computer to do it for you. It might be right, it might be wrong. And these are computers, these are artificial intelligence which are governed by, these, for example, Grok is governed by Elon Musk, these massive capitalist, far right people who are going to program them in certain way to give certain conclusions, right? So that in itself is a very rigged system. And also, I think lastly, the way education has changed is that we are no longer allowed, the idea of thinking has vanished, right? Which I think is a very, very sad thing, because when you read books, when you see programs which are genuinely educational, it forces you to think, it forces you to analyze, it forces you to make sense of the world, which for me, I think is education's number one import that everybody should take away from. But that is gone. And that really benefits the political parties, because that creates citizens that no longer have a mind of their own, that are controlled by Grok, that are controlled by ChatGPT, that will never pick up a book, that will never question the government, why are you doing this incorrectly, right? You create this very Orwellian system wherein whatever the government says is the truth and nobody else must question it. And if somebody does question it, you question that person instead of thinking, oh, maybe, she's allowed her sense of questioning, or maybe she's right, and, we should listen to her. So I think there is a depth of the process of thinking which is so germane to education as well.
You used a very fascinating term, primer of communalism, for the books that are today. So can these primers of communalism tomorrow have historians who are communal too?
Absolutely, and I think they will, the tomorrow is not very far. Like I said, there is a complete overtake of educational institution. So these are now going to be people who are going to produce and churn papers, quote unquote, which are going to be completely communal, right? At one point of time in academic research, in academia, peer review was considered to be the standard. So if your paper is peer reviewed, it's a good paper, you can, rely on it, there's credible information in it, right? But if you're going to have an educational institution full of peers who are all communal, so they are going to ratify a communal paper. So the peer review is going to go for a paper that you absolutely cannot rely on, right? That there is no credibility to. The kinds of ideas that are coming, for example, this idea of, sati is a Western construct and caste is a Western construct. These are ideas tomorrow which are going to get ratified in peer-reviewed papers, etc., right? So obviously they are going to create, and I won't even call them historians, because for you to be a historian, you need to be able to understand history critically, right? So I think the next overtake is going to be academic research, which so far has been actually the best, probably our last hope, that as long as Indian academic research is being done by people who are genuinely, well-versed in historical methodology, they can critically think, as long as that is happening, we're still good. But I think this is going to be the last step. And once, the academic research itself says that whatever the NCERT is saying is true, and only Mughals were the ones who were brutal, and there is a complete weeding out of all the information to the contrary. Again, a very 1984 just keeps swirling in my mind as I'm speaking. Then that is the truth. That primer of communalism is now the paper of communalism as well, and well, that's it. You've been able to sort of QED, as you say, that Mughals were always communal because, well, look, even the paper says that.
Thank you, Ruchika, for this extremely fascinating, interesting and informative session with us on what it can mean for the future of our history and historians as they may come.
Thank you.